We're going to have a comparison video here. We got the Analogue 3D as it goes up against emulation on the Steam Deck, the OG hardware of the Nintendo 64, and I'm going to be also using emulation via my computer right here. Not that title belt right there, but my computer right here. Up first, we're going to be using Emulation Station via the Steam Deck. What I like about the Steam Deck and Emulation Station is that, I legally backed up my ROMs to my console and everything, and Emulation Station picks the best settings per your device. So right now, I didn't do anything to this. As you can see, the text is clear. The characters are clear. It's made for Nintendo 64, so obviously the characters and the technology for the time are going to be blocky, but you can see those blocks are smooth. And here's a little bit of the gameplay footage. This is a simulation, so it's the computer controlling all these characters. And just notice the differences. It's emulation because you see the borders here on the screen from the emulation setup to emulate the Nintendo 64. And what I'll show you here is clarity in the faces of the characters and everything. And just look at the backgrounds and whatnot. Just the smoothness and the frame rate of this emulation. Look at that. See, smooth. The rounded corners is just 3D characters. Another thing that I'm going to show you is a lot of the things that when we get into the Analogue 64 or Analogue 3D or whatever it is, that when you get into the wide shots, the background distorts and some of the characters distort as well as when the camera goes into wide shots. So whenever the camera pans out wide, which I'll show you here in a second, you'll see some distortion or some pixelation in the character models and in the backgrounds and things like that. Okay, this is the wide shot that I was speaking about. This is still Emulation Station via the Steam Deck. What I've run into, which you'll see here momentarily when we move over to the Analogue 3D, that when you get wide shots like this, the backgrounds usually blur. The characters are usually highly pixelated and everything. And it's just a hot garbage is what I would say. Notice all the text is still clear and crisp and everything. And the character models move pretty smoothly. And now, what most of you want to see, we'll transition over to the Analogue 3D. This is the interface for the Analogue 3D library that I own. And what you'll notice is the cartridge art. What I figured out via their website and a couple of YouTube videos that it does not come this way out of the box. Once you plug up the Analogue 3D for the first time, the cartridge art will not show up for the games that you put inside the console. That's because if you've seen other how-to videos, you might have seen that in a demo kit. In a demo kit, Analogue preset these things up for those influencers and whatnot. So you have to figure out via GitHub and YouTube how to make this work for your console. So now we got some gameplay of the Analogue 3D in action. You can see some of the texts are kind of dark and a little bit blurry, but here where it truly shines, so to speak, is with the character models here. So this is supposed to be, running Nintendo 64 hardware or whatnot. So it's supposed to help the game perform a little bit better. You can go into the settings and try to remedy this, but check it out. So this is what I have it set at as current. So if you go to sharpness, you keep it on very soft to round out those jagged edges that these 3D models have. So if I go all the way up to very sharp, as you see here, that pixelation and all those jagged edges show themselves. I don't like that. So back to soft. And there's some other settings here. You can go to the interpretation and just try to brighten that in the gamma transfer as well. But these are some of the settings here that'll try to help out your picture a little bit. As you can see, it's still some distortion and pixelation in the character model faces. And this is the overall display mode is clean. And this is just some of the presets that they have in there. SBC is all right, but as you see here, it's still pixelated in the face and everything. So I'm only speaking for myself, and I thought that, you know, they made this whole new machine with modern parts and whatnot, that it would probably give it a little bit better display or anything. This is, I kind of feel no different than getting a RetroTink or one of those little adapters for your HDMI port to analog configurations for the original hardware, which we'll see a little bit later. So, I mean, this gives it that vintage look, going through some of the CRT filters and whatnot, which I really don't care for. I mean, it was awesome back in the day when it was all that we had, but now here we are in 2025, heading into 2026. I want better graphics for my old shit. So, you know, but case by case scenario for you all. Now here's some actual gameplay footage. You already see the jankiness in some of this video. Now here with the character models. Now this is the Analogue 3D. Like I said, this is a wider shot, so you get a lot of pixelation in the character models and whatnot in the wider shots. But as you saw in the UI for this, I don't have a lot of games to compare to, and my specific purpose was for the wrestling games, because that's what I love, that's what I collect. So that's what I got the Analogue 3D for. And like I said, you can kind of see what I was talking about before. That's a wider shot there to where, you know, the characters start to pixelate out and get a little bit distorted and everything. And then I can show you that a little bit better in the next clip here. But if you go in and try to change up some of these settings, you can get a better feel for what the Analogue 3D has to offer. But we'll just keep on rolling with what we got. So right here is the wide angle shots that I was talking about. As soon as the character gets down. All right, there we go. So it'll widen out and you can see how pixelated everything starts to get. The character gets a little bit blocky, distorted. It's way worse in comparison to running emulation on the Steam Deck. Now, with our original hardware set up, we got everything connected. We can see how this does in comparison to the Analogue and the Steam Deck. All right, and this is the N64. You can see the blurriness and the distortion in the text, but this is what you get when you buy one of those AV adapters to HDMI for your original hardware. So you're at what the capabilities of the adapter that you buy. I mean, I can't go in like on the Analogue 3D and change a whole bevy of settings and everything. I'm just locked into what you see here on the screen for this Analogue to HDMI adapter for the original N64. So it's locked at the stretched aspect ratio, which I don't have the option to change other than to go from 1080p to 720p, which it doesn't look any different and whatnot. So I'm stuck with what you see here, and the Analogue 3D surpasses this in a multitude of ways. But like I said, for me personally, for my use case, you know, the Analogue 3D isn't, well, I mean, well, look at this. It is very much so better than the original N64, but like it's not doing too much more than what this adapter is doing right now. So I mean, look at it. It's just blobby, dark mess, just distorted picture. And we can just go into the next clip to where, we had the comparisons on the Steam Deck and Analog 3D of the wide shot that I was speaking about for this specific game. Whenever the camera zooms out wide, we see how well the hardware, software, or whatever does with rendering that image. And spoiler, it's not that good. So let's check that out real quick. And we're going to move into our wide shot here. Once these characters get into position, you can kind of already see right here, just it's dark, it's blurry, it's janky, and like you can't, the distortion on the Analog 3D was bad, but this is way worse. Okay, now it's PC time. So, you can already see the differences here and up there since I'm on my computer. And this is running on RetroArch. And it's another emulation setup. So I'm at the whims of what the settings are. I didn't go in there and I didn't change anything. This is straight up just running my backup ROM files that I've legally sourced for this game on N64. And already you can see the differences. It's kind of similar to what we saw in the very first setup with the Steam Deck. Now, I'm pretty sure you can go in there and do some tweaks. And it also is dependent on your computer setup. I think this computer I have right now has a graphics card with like a freaking 3070 Ti or something like that. And then, as I said, I didn't go in the settings for RetroArch and change anything for this emulation. This is just the default settings for this particular game on this emulation setup. And like I said, it's very similar to what we saw in the Steam Deck for Emulation Station, but RetroArch is a different setup. Personally, between the two, I prefer Emulation Station because Emulation Station is a little bit of an easier setup and it does all the heavy lifting for you, as to RetroArch is a little more intuitive, if you will. You got to do a little more tinkering and moving things around to get everything to work as is intended to, per my experience. This is only talking about my experience. So it looks pretty good on PC. And like I said, you have more power with a PC and options for settings and whatnot. But let's get into the wide shot that everybody has come to know. All right, there's a little more game footage as these characters get into position for the wide shot and everything. You can kind of see a little bit of it. Some of the edges start to get a little frayed and everything. But as I said, this is on a PC. And you have a little more horsepower in the tank there to make some adjustments and everything. You can kind of see a little bit of pixelation and distortion here. But as I said, the picture still looks a little bit better than what we seen on the Analog and the original N64. And here we are. Here we go. He just won't get away from me. I think I'm actually controlling these characters now. So, all right, here we go. We got some distance. That camera is wide. And there you go. You can see a little bit of pixelation and distortion, but the overall picture is still pretty good. But that is on PC emulation. And if you would be interested in seeing what these things would look like on your television screen, I have my TV set up here, and I'll have 4 clips to follow this to show you from the Steam Deck, from the Analog 3D, the N64, and my other PC here. So enjoy.